first vice president of the Asian Vision Institute, and the director of Center for Sustainable Development Studies. And very warm welcome to all. And it's our first seminar on clean energies, which is the cooperation between the Asian Vision Institute and EnergyLab. And thank to Ms. Brigid Macintosh, and also the energy teams and AVI team for organizing this event. And they have been working very hard in the last couple of months to make it happen. And so, Brigid, would you like to have a few comments? Or I can just go straight.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bridget McIntosh. I am the Country Director of EnergyLab Cambodia. EnergyLab Cambodia was an organisation set up to support the growth of the clean energy market in Cambodia. There is so much opportunity that clean energy brings for Cambodia and the economy. And we would like to take this opportunity to share some of that information. I've been working in renewable energy for 20 years or more, and over that time it's been an incredible journey. But the main thing I've noticed is that now the costs of clean energy have dropped so significantly. At the beginning of my career, I had to try and convince people to take up clean energy because it was nice for the environment, or you didn't need to burn fossil fuels. But now the reasons for clean energy are so much more compelling because of cost reductions and improvements in technologies. So I'm really excited this afternoon to be able to take this opportunity, working with the Asian Vision Institute today, to share some of the information that exists, because there are still a lot of myths, and there's still people don't think about electricity very often, and fair enough. We just want to be able to turn our lights on and get electricity, and we don't really think about it day to day. But it's a very important part of Cambodia's future. So we would like to take this opportunity to share what's happening globally in clean energy, and then regionally, some of Cambodia's neighbours, and then here in Cambodia. So I'd love to introduce Ms. Anna Kane. She has been working with a lot of renewable energy projects in Australia, and is now based at EnergyLab Cambodia. And she is bringing her wealth of experience to share some of the information today. Thank you, Anna.
Thanks, Bridget. Did you want me to present now or do an introduction? Well, I think.
Yeah. I would suggest bringing up your presentation. If you can share your screen, and if you have any problems.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Cool. Perfect. All right. As Bridget said, I'm Anna. I'll just share my screen so that you can see my presentation.
While Anna is pulling up her screen, I'll just let you know that you can type any questions on this webinar. Unfortunately, you can't see each other, which is a bit of a shame, but I'll let you know that there's about 28 people now that's joined this webinar. Actually, no, 32. The numbers are going up. And you can type your questions. There's a button that says Q&A, and you can type those questions. And then at the end, I will work with Dr. Pisset, and we will manage answering some of those questions for you. All right. Thank you, Anna.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bridget. My name's Anna, and I've got about a 20-25-minute presentation about the opportunities that Cambodia has to use and to benefit from clean energy. And I'm really excited to present today about this because although we might not think about energy every day, we might turn on the light and hope that the light turns on. Energy and electricity is really the lifeblood of the economy, and really has a big role to play in improving people's lives. It's a big employer as well, and brings investment to Cambodia. And also, in particular, clean energy is a very low cost option. And so the more clean energy we can integrate into Cambodia's energy mix, the more affordable it will be, both for industry as well as for residential mums and dad customers as well. So we'll have a look at that. Look at, as Bridget said, what's happening in the rest of the world and what the opportunities are in Cambodia as well. We're from, Bridget and I are from Clean Energy Cambodia, and our goal and our vision is to see a world powered by clean energy. And we do a range of things to support that to happen. But I'll go straight to the presentation rather than dwelling on EnergyLab. We're going to have a look at clean energy. As Bridget said, some global, regional and local trends, the policies that support or enable it, and also the companies and organizations working in clean energy. So the first question is, what is clean energy? It's kind of this cool term that sounds good, but actually what is it? Most electricity to me seems pretty clean because I can't see how it's generated. But what clean energy is a source of energy that we can use and benefit from, but it doesn't pollute the environment. So some examples of clean energy are solar power, which is powered by the sun, wind power, run-of-river hydro, and bioenergy, so biomass type from farms. So one interesting thing is hydro, when deployed run-of-river, doesn't cause too much impact, but actually when you see big dams, that causes some environmental issues as well as affects the people that live around that dam. And so we don't really consider that to be a clean source of energy. However, when deployed well, it can be a clean source of energy. And Cambodia is really lucky that it has a large amount of hydro, which is very useful for integrating new technologies, and which we might explore later on in the presentation. But actually, when you see big dams, that causes some environmental issues as well as... I'm just getting some feedback. I'll just checking in on that. So we don't really consider that to be a clean source of energy. Is someone, maybe if we could mute ourselves. Great, wonderful, thank you. It's not just all about the supply of energy. It's also can be things that we do in our homes, offices and factories. So we can use energy more efficiently, and that's called energy efficiency, surprisingly enough. So we can basically get the same work out of something without using so much energy. And we can also use energy more smartly. So we can only use it when we actually only have the equipment on when we actually use it. And we can think about ways to automate our use of energy so that we minimize and optimize. So we're using energy in a way that we don't overuse the resource. Okay, so what's the sources of energy? Like we have a bit of a think about how Cambodia currently powers its electricity network. At the moment, the two biggest sources of energy are, and I'm just sorry, I've just got to move something. The two biggest sources of power are coal and hydro. So you can see in 2018 that they made up about 80% of energy use or energy consumption, electricity. And 60% in 2019. But then if we track forward to think about, well, how much will we use in 2030? We're starting to really fill up that portion of coal and gas. So we're starting to use a lot more coal and gas in 2030 compared to the earlier years of about 30%. And that's a really interesting thing. And we can sort of see, well, how much clean energy we're using. We're projected to use about 17 to 20% hydro. And so there's not going to be a huge amount of more hydro put into the network. And if we think about the typical clean energy or renewable energy that people think about, so solar and wind, we're only going to be using about 1 to 2% of those new emerging, well, not so new, but new to Cambodia clean energy technologies. So that's pretty interesting. And so we'll have a bit of a think about that later in the presentation as well. There are other sources of it's not all about electricity though. So we've got opportunities for clean energy in transport, as well as in cooking and thermal energy. But this presentation will mainly talk about the electricity network. There's loads of benefits to clean energy, as you might expect me to say. But these, I guess, thinking about, well, logically, it's a cheaper form of energy than is available compared to traditional sources. It's environmentally sound, so you don't incur costs associated with environmental impact. It supports the growth of GDP and brings jobs, local jobs to Cambodia. It's really fast to deploy. So you can build a solar farm in about 6 months, compared to many years for a traditional coal-fired or gas-powered power station. And that's a really important thing in Cambodia, where we've got increasing demand for a really, really fast growth of demand for electricity. So it's very important. And it's also very reliable. So and a really interesting thing that I've been observing over this COVID situation is the huge amount of, or all the reports that are showing that the solar and wind technologies, they're actually growing in how much they're generating compared to other forms of electricity, like coal and gas. And the reason for that is that it's cheap to run, and you don't need those imports of the fuel, so the coal and the gas. So it's very reliable and resilient to import requirements. There are some challenges though. It's a new technology in Cambodia, and so there needs to be some thought in how it integrates with other forms of energy. I've got cost here as well, but I've actually got, it's actually sometimes not known how inexpensive or how cost effective it is. And so I think maybe rather than cost, it maybe should be education about about the cost of clean energy. So that's a challenge. And we also, in order to bring any new technology or new industry into a country, we need to have strong policy as well to drive the right investment. So we'll have a step back now and have a think about what is happening globally. So as I said before, we've got Cambodia's got strong hydro and also coal-fired power currently. And actually, so if we look at the global share of renewable energy, which is about 30% currently, compared to Cambodia at 50%, Cambodia is pretty good. It's seen as a mainly renewable energy electricity network. But if we project forward to the future, we can see that about 70, Cambodia is going to drop down slightly to 23% share of renewable energy, but the rest of the world is going towards, is going to be at over 60% renewables. So that's a really interesting thing to think about. What sort of energy will Cambodia have in the future? And we probably need to ask ourselves why the rest of the world is moving to a much higher share compared to Cambodia. And so I guess the logical question is, well, why is that the case? Why is there a global trend towards clean energy? Well, one, the cost, it's the technology cost has come down and is expected to continue to come down. So it's a very cheap option in terms of energy source. Although it's new to Cambodia, it is a widely demonstrated and deployed technology. So there's over a terawatt, which is sometimes we think about kilowatt hours. Well, that's many orders of magnitude higher. There's a huge amount of solar PV and wind generation already deployed. So it's a very low risk technology for someone investing in it. It has a very predictable output, which sometimes is the odds. Sometimes we think about solar or wind, it's like, well, I can think of a time where the sun's not up, hey, like in the evening. But actually, we know very predictably when solar and when wind will generate well, and when it might not be so good. And so we can manage around that so that we can maximize the cheaper solar wind technology, both at a daily level and also at a seasonal level, so we can make use of the rest of the system. And it's also the supply is very secure. So once you install a solar farm or a wind farm, you don't need to import any more equipment or fuel in order for that to generate well. Whereas for conventional fuel technologies like gas, oil, and coal, you need to import it unless you have a supply locally. So it's a pretty compelling reason, particularly for countries that don't have large sources of local fuel. There's also, I guess, multilateral efforts to move away from traditional coal-fired or fossil fuel based technology, and so clean energy is a really good alternative and very available currently. Not just at the government level, but also there's real interest from both investment banks and customers and brands to decarbonize the supply chains, which is sort of an interesting and quite emerging thing that is really driving behavior of and investment. So I've just got an example here of how the price of these different technologies is coming down. So these are all examples of renewable energy and clean energy. So solar PV, that's CSP is concentrated solar power, and we've got onshore and offshore wind. So you can see the downward trajectory and how cheap they're getting, and looks like it'll continue to drive the price down. And you can see that compared to other fuels, so we've got coal and gas, combined cycle gas here. Solar and wind is much more is less expensive today and will continue to be less expensive in years to come. So thinking about if you're going to invest in a large scale or a small scale, any sort of energy technology, it's going to operate for probably 20 to 30 years at least. And so decisions made today will lock in the costs that of energy users will see in the future. And so this is, you can see that there's it could be quite an important cost saving to invest in clean energy today. So have a bit of a look at what's happening in the rest of the world, and in our neighbourhood. So if we look at in Southeast Asia, most nations have a target for deploying renewable energy. Cambodia doesn't have an official target, and you can see that when we project out to 2030, it looks like the target is, or the resulting renewable energy will be about 1 to 2% if we exclude hydro, which is often excluded in these targets. So how are these other countries with these targets think you're going to achieve it? So we'll just have a look at Vietnam. So Vietnam's energy policies have got a 21% renewable energy target by 2030. They've got these things called feed-in tariffs for wind and solar farms. So they'll say, this is the price. If you install wind or solar or a particular technology, we will give you this price for electricity for the electricity that it generates, and that brings a lot of investment in those technologies. So it really helps to establish a sector or an industry, all the supply chains, all the development effort. They've got also got rooftop solar feed-in tariffs. So if a factory installs solar on its roof, it can also receive that feed-in tariff. And that's a really interesting policy, because it means you don't have to invest if you're generating electricity at this point of consumption. So where you're using your electricity, you don't have to pay for all of the transmission network required to convey the electricity that you might otherwise if you're burning a solar farm or a coal-fired power station a long way away. They're investigating this idea of a corporate PPA, so allowing a company to contract directly with a power station in order to source the power directly or attribute the power directly. And they're also as they're going through their power development planning process at the moment, they're actually removing coal from their planning. Interestingly, in the next round of their power development plan, they've explicitly identified that they want to prioritize renewable energy, which taking like a economy-wide perspective, they're really trying to maximize that, which is really interesting. And so you can see that they're going from quite a small amount of renewable energy, or if we look at just solar, only 100 megawatts in 2016 to 11,000 megawatts in 2020. So very rapidly built up their renewable energy sector. Thailand have a similar approach. They did a study in about 2 years ago, looking at different levels of renewable energy penetration and how they would go about integrating that energy. And as a result of that study, they modeled different levels of renewable energy integration, and they found that the highest level of integration would allow them to have the cheapest cost power longer term, and so they've adopted that, as well as the recommendations for how to integrate. So they didn't just plug in solar or wind, they also thought about what would be the enabling technologies that they would need to install. They've also looking to put solar on all their hydroelectric dams. They've got a rooftop solar program. They've just introduced a peer-to-peer trading. So someone generating electricity but not consuming it on a rooftop can then sell it to their neighbor. And they've got a range of other incentives. I think I've just already gone through that in quite amount of detail, but this really comes down to the power development plan level. And if you think if you can use your power development plan very holistically and bring in all the economic drivers, then there's a real compelling case for more or as much as possible renewable energy. So we'll have a look now at efforts towards clean energy in Cambodia currently. So it's actually stated in the rectangular strategy the importance of renewable energy. So you can see that I've highlighted a few items here. So renewable, one of the challenges identified in the latest rectangular strategy was that renewable energy hasn't been used to its full economic potential. And there's a desire to really encourage investment in clean and renewable energy, as well as to expand electricity supply. So when we look at then the explicit energy policies at a government level, big focus on electrification, and that's a really great thing because it means that more and more people can get access to energy. But it also needs to be at an affordable rate, and so great effort has happened there by connecting rural customers who would otherwise be using a diesel-based fuel you can reduce the electricity price, which is great. And they're also keen to ensure sufficient supply so that you can attract business and ensure that people can have access to energy when they need it. Clean energy can support all of those things, particularly the reduction of energy supply, energy cost. I thought it was also interesting to have a look at the priorities of industry. So generally they overlap with the government objectives. I think there's a really interesting thing that's emerging where industries are keen to source from renewable energy, and that is becoming more explicit. I think there's been a number of news articles about it recently, as well as in particular in Cambodia, government brands coming out and signing up to commitments for renewable energy. And so maybe that will become a more explicit effort in future. There are a range of ways that of policies that can support deployment of clean energy. So we talked a bit about rooftop solar before, and I'll give some examples of auctions and PPAs shortly. But I guess there's not just one way to achieve the outcome. There's lots of different ways that can support each other in order to support the deployment of clean energy. Just wanted to remind us that current projections are that we're going to reduce the share of clean or renewable energy in future. However, there are some there's great progress occurring, and hopefully, and what I'm showing right here is a grab of all the solar farms, and we've got one wind farm that's under development as well in Cambodia. So there is stuff happening at a large scale in Cambodia. I think 150 megawatts of solar projects under construction and 450 approved. Oh, and here is a list of those. There's been one wind farm that's been has been approved and has been negotiating its PPA for quite a while, I think over a year now. So hopefully that will come to fruition soon. It'll be a great addition. So I'll now go through two kind of case studies that show some ways of deploying clean energy. The first is a competitive procurement or auction process. The reason I show this is it was used in Cambodia last year for a solar farm to great success. So essentially there's an open call. So if you're a buyer of electricity, so in Cambodia's case, EDC, you would say, I want this amount of electricity. Market, tell me, these are my requirements. Who wants to provide it? And then a whole heap of people can bid in. So usually there's a technical shortlist. So you'll pre-qualify different companies who can provide what you're asking for. And then from that, those technically shortlisted bids will then offer financial bids, and then you'll be able to select the winner, maybe with some negotiation in between. So it's an interesting process because it takes away the financial requirement first up. So you know that everyone who moves through the financial bid process is able to provide you what you want. So sometimes the way that these things happen is they'll put the whole bid in together, and the cheapest project will win, but it might not be technically feasible. So that technical shortlisting process is a really good way to avoid that, because it's very hard to say no to a very cheap project, but maybe sometimes we should. So EDC and ADB collaborated last year on a solar farm project. So EDC provided the land and was supported to run a similar process. They got a huge number of projects bidding in, 26 technical submissions were received and shortlisted to provide financial proposal. And then there was another round of negotiations, and actually the winning project has won with an extremely low price of $3.90 per kilowatt hour. It's the cheapest in Southeast Asia, and maybe further. There was some, like, is that a realistic price going forward? Well, there was some concessional financing available through ADB, and the land and transmission infrastructure was provided by EDC. Usually land isn't provided by EDC, although they do provide the transmission infrastructure. And so it might be too ambitious for all future projects, but does show what is possible when you run a similar process like this. I guess for context, the previous round of solar projects were approved at about a bit over 7 cents per kilowatt hour, and coal is a bit more expensive again compared to that. But you can really see what happens when you bring in some competitive tension to a process. You can really achieve very good pricing. The other example I wanted to show was this idea of corporate PPAs. And I mentioned before that it's an emerging area of interest for industry in being able to source clean energy or renewable energy for their operations. So a corporate PPA, you have a generator wherever the generator needs to be for either for the renewable energy resource, and then you have your factory or your user of energy. And the way that they get energy between themselves from the generator to the factory is the electricity flows through the poles and wires. So the power lines are the electricity infrastructure. So there's a flow of electricity, but once you plug your energy into the network, you can't really see where it goes. But you can record with a great level of accuracy how much goes out of the generator and how much goes into the factory. So you can match up the energy that way. So then the reason often that these corporate PPAs are set up is so that you can attribute the clean energy that comes out of the generator to the factory. So there's a payment for you follow your normal payment scheme for payment of network and for the energy, and then there's also payment that flows for the clean energy certificates, they're sometimes called. This is being trialed in Vietnam. So there's been a project to work out the financial structures around that corporate PPA. And the reason it's interesting is many of it to Cambodia is that there's some similarities and some differences between the two electricity markets. So Cambodia has in Cambodia, you need to buy all electricity is bought and sold from EDC, and you get the general mix of energy. So a factory that wants to source renewable energy actually has no way of doing it other than going outside of the market of Cambodia and procuring renewable energy certificates, which adds to the cost of the renewable energy. Oh, sorry, it adds to the cost of energy because you've got to add something on. And also takes that investment outside of Cambodia. So investment for the energy. And I guess there's a point where if it's really expensive, that factory or that company will go somewhere else to be able to procure the renewable energy more cheaply. I guess what are we seeing? Well, actually, a lot of companies in Cambodia and Vietnam are wanting to be able to source this renewable energy in order to decarbonize their supply chains. They're making commitments about sourcing. And so the way that they've tried to solve that in Vietnam is to set up this arrangement where you can have this direct PPA structure, which would mean that you can have a similar structure to this payment structure, where the electricity authority is paid for the electricity consumed. So if you were to translate that to Cambodia, EDC would still get paid for the electricity because they're buying it from the generator, but then the generator, the factory that wants to get into this corporate PPA would be able to buy the green output of the power plant. So this DPA project in Vietnam is going to be implemented next year, and so it will be a really interesting opportunity for Cambodia to observe and learn how it works. I mentioned before that the drivers for this will, there's a lot of companies signing up to procure 100% renewable energy through RE100, which is Renewable Energy 100, but also science-based targets, and quite a large number of them currently operate in Cambodia. And so we may see that this becomes increasingly important. So we'll have a quick look now at the companies involved in clean energy in Cambodia. So I mentioned before EDC, so Electricity de Cambodia, they are the operator of the network in Cambodia, and they also are the buyer and seller of energy. So they do all the retailing to customers, and they sign all the PPAs. They are regulated by EAC, so Electricity Authority of Cambodia, and owned by Ministry of Mines and Energy, who set the policy for energy in Cambodia, and they're also owned by Ministry of Economy and Finance. They also supply increasingly to renewable energy enterprises, which are rural energy enterprises, which are rural networks that are increasingly connecting up to the national network. Sometimes they're not yet connected up. What I really want to call attention to is that most electricity generated in Cambodia is by, we call them IPPs, so independent power producers. And so there's a very strong, I guess, culture of commercial or private sector involvement in energy in Cambodia. And so if we think about how might we bring in competition through that reverse auction process, or how might we sort out those corporate PPAs? Well, there's already the private sector engagement, which is a real opportunity to grow from. There are a whole heap of companies working in directly providing clean energy solutions. So Total, which is nominally an oil company, also has a solar arm that is installing a lot of solar, as well as Clean Tech Solar, which has installed many large projects in Cambodia, CamWorks, as well as the smaller ones like NRG Solutions. Schneitek, people might remember or might recognize as they've built quite a few solar farms already in Cambodia. Blue Circle's the owner of the wind farm that I was mentioning before as well. There are also a load of development agencies that are also supporting at different levels. AFD, for example, is working with MME at the moment in developing and modernising the grid, which will be a real enabler. So part of that project is to have a wind and solar forecasting desk to understand how renewable energy is operating, which will be a real key enabler. 3i is doing some great work there, the Australian, supported by Australian Aid, and I've mentioned ADB's work before, as well as the others in this slide. So as I finish off this presentation, I just wanted to reiterate that clean energies, it's a real opportunity for Cambodia. It's an additional way that we can support investment and local jobs. So if you think about importing, the options of importing electricity versus building electricity locally, it means that money stays in Cambodia. It's the cheapest possible source of electricity, and every network that most countries are seeking to maximize the amount of renewable energy and clean energy in their mix to bring down electricity prices. It's resilient, so you don't need to import any fuel in order to have an operating electricity system, because your fuel is available locally, and it's really fast to build. So it means that as Cambodia's electricity demand goes up, it can be added to continue to support it. So thanks everyone for listening, and I'm sure I'm going to get lots of great questions, which I look forward to. But I'm Anna, and it was a really pleasure to be part of this.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's a wonderful presentation. Dr. Pisset, would you have any questions, or would you like to facilitate any questions from the audience?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Brigitte and Anna, for a very good, very interesting presentations showing from the global perspective to regionals and Cambodian context. And right now, as of now, we have two questions that have been posed by the participants, and I think we may have 2 or 3 rounds of questions and answers. Right now, let's pick up 2 questions that we raised in the chat room, and then after Anna has answered the questions.
I'm sorry, Dr. Pisset, it's very difficult to hear. Could you try again, please?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, very clear. Thank you.
Okay, let's try to take provide the opportunity for Anna to answer 2 questions from the participants, and we may have 2 rounds or 3 rounds of question and answer. So we will go for first round with starting with the 2 questions from our participants. So the first question is, what is the percentage of the clean renewable energies in Cambodia? And what is the trend in 10 years? And the second question is, are factories allowed to install solar on the roof? Won't this be a problem for EDC? And the third one, can we fully depend on clean energies? So we have 3 questions at the moment, and let Anna answer the questions, and then we will move another round of questions.
Wonderful, great. Well, I think the first question was, what's the current breakdown of clean energy in Cambodia at the moment? And I had a slide on it. I might not go to it because there's quite a few slides in between. So currently, or in 2018, about 50% of energy in Cambodia was generated, or electricity was generated from hydro, which is quite a high amount. But then if we look forward in 10 years, there's a huge amount of coal-fired power stations going in, as well as contracts signed to source coal-fired power from Laos. And so if we project forward to 2030, the percentage of coal and gas will go, I think it was 30% in 2018, and it'll go up to 77% in 2030. So the trend is towards coal-fired and fossil fuels. In that projection, looking at, I think it was 1% wind and 1.4% solar. So some, but not much. We are though waiting for the power development plan, the updated power development plan, which will look out to 2040. And so we may see that proportion go up, but based on current projections. Maybe there's opportunities to bolster and put more of the cheaper solar and wind in. I hope that answered the question. I think was the next. Do you want me to just continue to answer the questions?
I'm happy to help you out with some of the questions, Anna, if you want.
I'm happy to answer them. I just want to make sure I'm answering them correctly. Was the next question? Well, happy to share that with you as well, Bridget.
So the next question
was it about rooftops? I think rooftops. So can you install? Can a factory install solar on its rooftop? So in 2018, a solar regulation came in, which provided a legal pathway for people to install rooftop solar, which is great. There has been since then a change in the way that electricity tariffs are set. So there's been moved from a flat volumetric charge, which means that your electricity is based on the way that you pay for electricity is based on the consumption of electricity through of your electricity. So you pay per kilowatt hour, and so there's been a revision to that approach, and so there's now time of use tariffs, which are great at trying to encourage people to use electricity when it's not the peak time, which is when it's expensive. So you charge based on when you use electricity, as well as a capacity charge. So that reflects the cost of the infrastructure, so the poles and wires of the electricity network that's required in order to supply you with electricity. And there was a further revision again this year, which meant that if you're a solar customer, you can only access the peak time of use tariff, which is not so much a problem for a factory that doesn't use electricity overnight, but it means that it's much more difficult to install solar and benefit and recoup your investment unless you only use electricity during the daytime. So it means the market is much smaller. How does this affect EDC? Well, I guess this is an interesting question because by installing solar at the point of consumption, it means that you're not necessarily buying your electricity from EDC. But really, when you install solar, you size it so that it shaves off some of your use, but you're still buying from EDC. And it could mean the difference between a company setting up a factory in Cambodia or not, as we're sort of seeing with those RE100s. So the companies, it's interesting also there's other benefits that you can get, that the network can get and EDC can get from having a rooftop solar system. So you don't have to invest in the network as much to bring the solar electricity to the customer, and you can also better improve the utilization of your distribution network. So it means you don't have to invest in substations and additional poles and wires to build the capacity of those lines. And so there's actually benefits back to the network that all customers share, rather than just the individual customer who is self-generating. All this in the context of very high, very increasing high growth of electricity consumption. So each year there's more and more electricity that must be procured by EDC in order to supply to customers. And so it means that EDC doesn't have to invest and take on that liability. The customer is also taking on that liability and managing the increased growth.
Okay.
Dr. Passat?
Yeah, so the next question is can we fully depend on clean energies?
Maybe Anna, I'll take
go on.
I'll take the nuclear question. So someone has asked a question, why is nuclear not included in Cambodia? This is actually a really good question. And Vietnam looked to have nuclear power. About 5 years ago, they abandoned the project. Nuclear is quite tricky. I mean, apart from the Fukushima disaster, nuclear power is actually quite expensive. And it takes a lot of time for the planning approvals because the waste product from nuclear is quite toxic. And so it needs to be carefully managed. So nuclear is expensive to build. It's slow to build. But one of the other disadvantages that they're finding in the UK is that it's not very flexible. It can't ramp up and down as easily, and it can't shut down really. And so in the age of cheaper solar and wind power, most grids electricity operators are wanting to incorporate the cheap solar and wind and then build the generation around that. So gas, for example, can be quite flexible, or hydro can be very flexible. So if the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, and then the wind picks up quickly, then the existing generation needs to drop down. And then if it becomes windy again, then the coal plant or the nuclear plant needs to ramp down. And so that ramping is quite difficult for nuclear power stations, and also coal finds that quite difficult. So generally, nuclear is quite a difficult generation source now to incorporate into electricity mixes. Of course, it doesn't have greenhouse emissions, which is valuable. And for a while there was a lot of a push towards nuclear power to reduce greenhouse emissions. But now, because solar and wind are so much cheaper, people are taking on renewable energy rather than nuclear. All right.
So, and there remains, can we go to another round of questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, there's a lot of questions asking about still ask about whether the wind and solar energy feasible in Cambodia. There have been discussions about the research by Museum Mines and Energies in the eastern part of Cambodia. Do you think it's feasible? And also, what are the policy, as you already mentioned, what are the challenges and the policies needed in order to move the clean renewable energies for better, and to move this forward. And and another areas of question is more about do you think low price bid recently in Cambodia doable? And do you think FIT for renewable energy will bring in the future? So with that question, so I leave the floor to Anna or Bridget to answer the question. Thank you.
Great questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there was a question about whether is it possible to have solar and wind in Cambodia. I think like the answer to that is definitely yes. Globally, we're seeing that countries are really trying to maximize the amount of wind and solar they have in their networks, because it means that the cost of electricity is lower. And I think there was you might remember the slide that looked at the future costs of coal and gas compared to wind and solar. And so thinking about if you're going to be supplying electricity in 10 years time, and you have the more expensive coal-fired or gas-fired power, you're merely missing an opportunity, and you might not be competitive, or electricity might not be affordable. There's over a 1,000 gigawatts, I think it is, of wind and solar deployed globally, and so there's no technical reason why Cambodia wouldn't be able to benefit. It has really good local resources, in both solar and wind, and happily, the solar resource is strongest where there are people and factories, and so it means there's a really good you don't have to build big transmission lines in order to access that energy source. Yeah, so is it possible? Yeah, it definitely is, and it can be a benefit to the country.
Anna, I like your example of happily, because solar is also happily producing during the peak demand period. So in Cambodia, the peak when everyone wants electricity is during the day, and that is when solar is producing. And also Cambodia's peak season is also in the hot season, and that is when solar is producing the high amount. So there's a really nice balance between solar output, wind output, hydro, and the mix that's possible in Cambodia. Do you want to go ahead, Anna, and answer the question about the Ministry of Mines and Energy? They did a solar and wind study in northeastern provinces in Cambodia. And there's a follow-on question on that, which is about what are some of the policy engagements, or what's necessary from a policy point of view to support more clean energy in Cambodia?
Yeah, well, it's great, awesome to hear that Ministry of Mines and Energy are talking about clean energy, or wind and solar, in Cambodia. Yeah, so I guess my thoughts on that are that's really great to hear. What would be needed to support? What policy would be needed to support it? I guess the key way is going to be through the power development plan, and how the mix of electricity sources that feed into Cambodia's network can complement and work together. Bridget made the comment about the inflexibility of nuclear power. I guess currently the plans are, we're seeing announcements about large coal-fired power stations, and they're quite inflexible, and so a really good way of providing baseload power. But if you have to ramp, if your demand is going up and down, it is hard to control them, or to ensure that they are operating in the correct way. And then also the similar issue to that is, if you have wind and solar, which also ramps up and down based on the supply, how does the other technologies that are feeding into the network fit in with that? And so an integrated approach is really important to ensure that the technologies work together. There's some interesting things around that, like the way that you structure your power purchase agreements, and how you incentivize more flexible generation, because a coal-fired power station or gas generator can be designed to be more flexible, but there needs to be a reason. So if your power purchase agreement says you want this amount of electricity 100% of the time, like a flat amount, then why would a coal-fired generator be able to ramp up and down? If you structure your PPA to say, we want you to be on call, for example, and follow this demand profile, so a generation profile, then it's easier for the operator to be able to achieve that, and therefore achieve a better mix of energy, or a cheaper mix of energy for the nation. Other policies include the feed-in tariffs, as we mentioned, so this fixed price to bring in development, ability to have rooftop solar, and which has already occurred, which is great. Renewable energy targets, which might be more appropriate than a feed-in tariff, because it means that developers can find the right technology mix in order to fit into that. The corporate PPAs structure, so it means that businesses can choose and source renewable energy. All of these things come together to support and provide policy certainty, essentially, for people to invest in clean energy in Cambodia.
Okay, so I think because of the time constraint, we will go a bit of another. Do you think
Sorry, Dr.
you
Bissett,
for- Excuse me?
we can't hear you, sorry.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
with the time constraint, I think right now let's go another quick rounds of questions and of answers.
Wonderful.
Two more like questions. The first one, do you think the COVID-19 is impacting the clean energies development in Cambodia? Because the international investor commitment to invest Cambodia in clean energies in Cambodia. And the second one, what kind of renewable energy that will invest or promote in Cambodia? And what locations, where locate, I'm not sure this one, where local. I mean, location that will get more profit for introducing to provide clean energies in Cambodia. I think you have
That's a good
answered some
question.
of the questions already, but maybe, so yeah, please try to clarify again, I think. And then I think after this, after you answer the question, I think it's time to wrap up the discussions. Thank you.
Great. Well, COVID-19, I think in the short term it may have an impact, but in the sort of the 5 to 10 year period, I think the impact is going to be relatively small. Electricity demand is less at the moment because of the impact of COVID-19. So that means that there is the existing generators are able to supply the electricity requirements this year, essentially, and next year. However, Cambodia's both the electrification rate and industrial growth mean that demand for electricity is increasing. Last year it increased by 20%, and that was and the years before it was at a similarly high level. And so we'd expect to see that continue. And so there's a big opportunity to bring in new investment to build the energy required, as well as the investment of those to build the factories, etc. So I wouldn't expect it to impact in international investments commitment to clean energy in Cambodia. Yeah, I think there's heaps of opportunity for investment, and I think the risk that we're seeing at the moment is probably more about the ability to get that clean energy to market. Yeah, but we can see that there's demand for clean energy through the likes of the RE100 companies, as well as the fact that it's a cheaper form of energy that can add to the national mix. On the question of where can you profit, where can you provide clean energy, where can you profit from clean energy? So maybe I won't answer this question directly, but maybe we'll talk about how you might go about finding a good site, a clean energy site. So really important is proximity to existing network and customer load area. The second issue is, where is the resource? So as I mentioned, good solar sites are quite close to industrial centres in Cambodia. Wind sites, the way you would find a wind site is you would look at a national, like a global database of wind resource, and then you would verify that with local monitoring. And then you need to follow the planning requirements to get your approvals in order to develop the site. And so that would be the way to profiting from clean energy in Cambodia.
Okay, so yep, thank you very much, Anna. I'm really sorry for the question that you already posed. Really good questions, but right now it's time. The time's up already, so I would like to invite Brigitte to give a short remark, and then I will share a short remark from as a co-host, and then we will call for what I call the close of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bissett. And thank you, Anna, for answering those questions so comprehensively. I can still see there are many more questions, so we can work to answer them offline as well. But in short, a lot of the questions seem to relate to is it feasible and is it possible? And if you look towards Thailand and Vietnam, they have targets to have 20 to 30% renewable energy. They believe it's possible. And I know that in Thailand, before they did the analysis of how solar and wind could work, they were a bit worried too. But after they did the detailed analysis, it turned out that they went for the highest level of target. So it's certainly possible and it will take some work, but it's worth it because it will lower electricity prices for everybody. So I really appreciate everyone joining today to learn more about clean energy. I know it's quite a nerdy topic. Anna and I love it. If you've got any questions, you're welcome to head to the cleanenergycambodia.org website where we answer a lot of these questions, or participate in Clean Energy Week at the end of the year in November, or contact us on Facebook. Thanks so much for joining. And I'll hand over to you now. Thank you, Dr. Bissett, for co-hosting this event. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank Brigitte and Anna, and thank everybody for your active participations and listening to presentation. So I just like to have a very short remarks actually on the as Anna and Brigitte already mentioned it. Right now, it's a global trend that the impacts of the climate change is obvious, and we need to divert to a more clean renewable energies. And of course, any source of energies have a different form of impact, but renewable energies have a cost less damage to the environment in compared to fossil fuel based in whatever forms. And so the global trend right now is to go for renewable clean energies. And the way it works right now, it make a lot of progress in global trend regionals in Cambodia because of the global policy and national policies, the first factors. And the second one is the collaboration between private sectors, donors, and governments, and civil society as well. And the third one is the reliable technologies, that can make it the renewable energy more costless compared to the conventional technologies. And also have the different market scheme that provide the competitive advantage compared to fossil fuels. And if you look at the Cambodia, Cambodia, even though it's a bit far behind other countries, but still we make a lot of progress, and there are a lot more to do. And Cambodian government try to include more clean renewable energy in the energy mix. And there's good collaboration with the government, private sector, and donors as highlighted in the presentations. And the reason that Cambodia have the should adopt and try to improve to create more to renewable energies. Cambodia receive the benefit for employment, for the lower energy price, less import of coals, and more reliable supply of the energies as highlighted in the presentations. And of course, the more the economic growth, the more energy needed to supply the industrialization, urbanization. I'm very happy to see the progress made in renewable energies, and thank to all the sectors, and even Bridget is one of the key actors and all those involved in this effort to make the environment cleaner and brighter, and make us more less vulnerable to climate change and greenhouse and also to reduce greenhouse gas emission to the environment. With that, I would like to thank you all, to the co-hosts and the teams and all the participants for actively participating in this events, and very productive. And we hope to co-host another events later on. Thank you.
Many thanks.